to look at Central Asia from our regions. This is a regional conversation organized by the Unit for the Study and Reflection on the Eastern Mediterranean, Caucasus, and Central Asia, which is made of partners and experts interested in these regions. This group of study is part of the Knowledge Network on Global, Regional, and Interregional Affairs of the COMEXI. We will be sharing knowledge on a region-to-region basis in this conversation. We will let you know who will be initiating this meeting, and the first two panelists will be talking on Central Asia. Later on, we will be talking about the importance of Mexico-Latin American relations with the region. Once we present the initial proposals, we will move on to the phase of open conversation with those participating in this meeting. Finally, we will make a round of conclusions to move to the closing at the end. Vanessa Zarate will be helping us in recapping in some moments of the meeting, and it's important that you know that the session will be recorded so that you can retrieve it from the networks and website of COMEXI. For the Mexican Council of Foreign Relations, we want to welcome you to this regional conversation on the importance of exchanging views from our respective regions. For those who participate in the regional conversation from various parts of the world, it's important to say that we all care about the Central Asia and the region and different regions which are linked to Central Asia. Let me introduce you to Bruno Valvanera, who will be speaking from Tbilisi. Bruno will open the conversation on the region. He is an expert he's an engineer, and he's a Mexican expert on Central Asia. He has been present in the development of Central Asia for many years, for many decades, and is also a member of our task force. He is an experienced development banker focused on transition economics and private sector, member of the independent board and director of Fintech, Renewable Energies and Sustainable Development. Is currently serving as independent member of the supervisory board of Liberty Bank in Georgia, where he is heading the risk committee, and QQ Bank of Uzbekistan, where he is heading the nominations and remunerations committee in 2020-22. He served as independent director of the supervisory board of Asaka Bank, where he headed the risk committee. Additionally, he is engaging into investment opportunities in fintech, renewable energy, and sustainable tourism. From 1996 to 2020, he worked at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, in a variety of positions. His last responsibility was as managing director of Central Asia based in Kazakhstan, from where he led a regional team in 6 countries: Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, Mongolia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Previous positions including being regional director for Caucasus, Moldova, and Belarus, based in Tbilisi, Georgia, regional head for 7 offices in Russia, based in Moscow, head of the St. Petersburg office, head of business development and syndications officer, based in London. Bruno has more than 35 years experience in development banking industry. Bruno, we welcome your participation. Please share your knowledge with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guadalupe. Thank you, everybody, for being in this conversatorio, which is a talkative platform, and I hope we will have a lot of interaction with all of you. As Guadalupe mentioned, I have been in the region. Currently, I'm in Tbilisi, where I was living for 6 years, but I've been covering, being in and out of Central Asia for the last 25, 30 years. So I have prepared, I'm assuming that the knowledge of Central Asia for many of the participants is quite low, which would be normal because most of the participants are in Mexico and Central Asia is very far away. I suppose it's like asking people in Central Asia to talk about Central America, and probably they have heard the names of the countries, but they are not very familiar. So I have prepared the table that will help us a little bit to understand how about the countries. Here is going to be the table. So I have decided to put, if you can put it in large screen. All right. So basically the definition of Central Asia is very different from different countries, but in reality, in my mind, Central Asia is composed of 5 countries, which are Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. And I have arbitrarily decided to put them in this order, which is not alphabetic or not by size or by population, but is, let's say, by level of development, starting from Kazakhstan all the way to Turkmenistan. In some of the definitions of Central Asia, they would add Afghanistan, which is true, that has border with a number of these countries and presents a security risk, and it's very important to manage the relationship with Afghanistan. And then some others would probably include Pakistan. Myself, I was covering also Mongolia, but let's stick to the definition of these 5 countries. Now, it's impossible to understand the dynamic of these 5 countries without understanding the key relationship they have with the 2 anchor large powers in the region, which are Russia and China. And this is why I have added these 2 columns at the end of my table. So let's go a little bit to try to understand about these countries. Well, these are countries that are not very big. As you can see, is between 7-8 million to 35 million people, which is very small compared to Russia and China. In terms of size, it is to note that Kazakhstan is a big country. Is for those who are in Mexico, I would say it's 50% larger than Mexico. And then you will have Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. They are both about the same size. They would be about the size of Spain. So just to give you an idea. And then you have the 2 small countries, which are the Kyrgyz Republic and Tajikistan. Of course, these are very small countries compared to Russia, which is the largest country in the world, and to China, which is also, I put their definition, mega country. Now, it's also impossible to understand these countries without understanding or without knowing and acknowledging the dependence on natural resources on one side. So countries like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan are very highly dependent of natural resources. In the specific case of Turkmenistan, 40% or almost 40% of the GDP is coming from gas. Now, any figure that comes to Turkmenistan, you need to take it with a little bit of a piece of salt, because there is no really reliable economic information of Turkmenistan, given that on the one side, it is the government that publishes the number, and the second, the exchange rate is an exchange rate that is artificial. But following, let's say, the official figures, 40% of the GDP of the country is coming from gas. What I would also add to this is that basically 90% or 95%, if not all of the gas that is sold from Turkmenistan is sold to China, with whom they have agreed a deal many years ago on the which they receive a relatively low price of gas. And in addition to that, they need first to pay the gas line, the cost of the gas line to bring the gas from Turkmenistan to China. So one would possibly say that is not a very good deal for Turkmenistan, but this is the way it is. Second country in importance of natural resources is Kazakhstan. They have a lot of oil and gas and some minerals. Unfortunately, most of those are dominated by the former family, Nazarbayev. So while the country is relatively rich in terms of exports of natural resources, there is not a lot of transparency with regards where those resources and these exports are coming and how they are distributed, let's say, amongst the population. Then Uzbekistan is a country that only about 20% of the GDP depends on natural resources, but it has huge potential. Number one, because it's one of the largest reserves in the world of gold, and they are extracting it, and they have some state companies that are in charge of that, but also they have oil and gas and minerals. And I didn't put in this slide, but also important to say that they have a lot of agricultural land, water, and cotton, which is also considered to be a natural resources. Finally, the two small countries, Kyrgyz and Republic and Tajikistan, they have basically negligible natural resources. Kyrgyz Republic has some gold. They had an agreement with a Canadian company, but it's always a little bit in dispute with them. In terms of industrialized countries, Uzbekistan, one could say that Uzbekistan is the most industrialized country in the region. When you look at the former CIS, by far the most industrialized is Russia, for sure. The second is Ukraine, and is particularly the east part of Ukraine, the one that the Russians are trying now to capture and to steal, one would say. And the third one is Uzbekistan, because there's quite a number of industry in Uzbekistan. The rest of the countries are not really very developed in terms of industry. Then in terms of GDP per capita, all of them from the same source, which is the IMF, what you would see is that in terms of GDP per capita, you have 4 countries that are relatively high, which are Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan, levels of around $15,000 per capita, which is more or less similar to what Mexico is having. The distribution of that wealth is something that is not in this chart and probably would need a little bit more of analysis. But then you have the other 3 countries that are quite low. And Uzbekistan, even with such a level of dependence on natural resources, is still a relatively poor country. Worth to note, Tajikistan, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, that has a GDP per capita of 1,250, relatively small population, and we will come to the political system dictatorship, which may be one of the obscure reasons to understand why it was the government of Tajikistan that decided to buy the famous presidential plane of Mexico. One would wonder whether they can afford it or not. Now, another angle very important to measure is that the Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyz Republic, and Tajikistan, are highly dependent on remittances, mainly those nationals that are living in Russia. And in the case of Tajikistan, very poor country, again, 50% of the GDP comes from remittances. But the same is for Kyrgyz and Uzbekistan, a bit less. In terms of political system, what I would say is that we have 3 countries where I have put democracy in brackets, which is because they have a dominant party. And that would be the case of Russia, which is United Russia. You have Kazakhstan under President Tokayev, who has taken over Nazarbayev, and Uzbekistan, where while you have a new president, has just been again voted 2 weeks ago and continues in power. The reality is that these countries have a not very developed democracy. So while they have elections, they're still a very dominant party. I would say it's probably like the PRI in Mexico in the 50s. Kyrgyz Republic is a very democratic country, which is, on the one hand, is good because there's a lot of democracy and a lot of activity. On the other hand, it's probably not that good because that creates a lot of instability every time they have elections. The opposition would win, and then you will be losing power. Finally, both Tajikistan and Turkmenistan are basically dictatorship. These are rulers that are going to give once they die, the president, they will inherit that to their sons. There's basically no election, and there's absolutely no room for democracy. In the case of China, is a one-party country, as you know, is the Communist Party. Now, very important to note is the relationship they have amongst themselves and with the two anchors. The first group I want to mention is the Eurasian Economic Union, which is a little bit like the European Union, because what it does is that it eliminates any tariffs of export and import from one country to another, but it's not as extensive as the European Union because it doesn't go to a systematization of the legislation, but let's say it's an attempt to have kind of European Union in the region that is composed of 5 members, 3 of Central Asia, well, 2 of Central Asia, which is Russia, Kyrgyz, and Kazakhstan, plus Armenia and Belarus. Uzbekistan is under heavy pressure to join the group and is trying to delay as much as possible their joining. And the reason for that is that once you belong to a group where you have a dominant country, in this case Russia, you lose a lot of your competitive advantages. And this has been the case in Kyrgyz Republic, where one could assess as marginal or negative their union to this Eurasian Economic Union because their own companies have been unable to compete with the companies in Russia mainly. Then you have the regional NATO, which is called the Collective Security Treaty Organization. And you may remember in January last year when there was this attempted coup d'etat in Kazakhstan that some countries sent troops to help President Tokayev. Well, this is a group that has 6 members, which are Russia, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. To note that Tajikistan is not member of the Economic Union, but yes, is member of this Collective Security Treaty Organization, in addition to Armenia and Belarus. And finally, another very important group is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where you have the 2 anchors, Russia and China, with basically all the countries of the region, except for Turkmenistan, that is a very close country. I didn't mention about Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan is a very, very, very close country. It has a totally dominated economy by the state companies. I've been there quite a few times. It's a country with basically no freedoms. It's a total dictatorship. So it's a country that is not admitted to any of these groups, but is a country that normally participates as an observer. So all in all, what we have is a group of countries that are important in terms of natural resources, are important in terms of immigrants that have been working mainly in Russia. And these are countries, also I didn't mention, but it's very important to note that none of them has direct access to the sea. Actually, countries like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, the goods need to cross 2 borders in order to arrive to the sea. And the only access to the sea of these countries is via China, because you cannot consider the Caspian Sea as a sea. The Caspian Sea is a lake, it's a big lake, but is a lake. So this is pretty much my introduction to the region. In terms of potential, again, I will highlight the potential of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which are the 2 most developed countries in the region. Thank you, Guadalupe.
Thank you, Bruno. I'm sure your presentation will raise many questions and will help and is helping us to open this conversation. Let me introduce you to Damian Jevic. He has served as senior political strategist, diplomatic advisor, and crisis advisor, both internationally and domestically. He joined Adat University from Belgrade, Serbia, where he served as executive director of the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, CIRSD, and editor of its journal, Horizons. He previously served as senior political special advisor to the President of the UN General Assembly, senior advisor and senior speech writer for the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Serbia. He's been director of planning and policy analysis in the presidential administration of the Republic of Serbia, special advisor to the president, fellow in European studies at the Nixon Center, now Center for the National Interest, and he was a director of the National Interest magazine. He is now a member of IDD, the Institute of Allied University. Welcome, Damian. Help us with your participation.
Thank you very much, Guadalupe. I'm very glad to be here. Good morning to all of you in Mexico. It's obviously good to see familiar faces. So Guadalupe and Alejandro, whom I both met in Baku previously, and Vanessa, of course. It's a great pleasure to see you again, and my friend and colleague, Ambassador Rodrigo Labardini. So I've asked Carla to put up a map, if she can do that. It's a map that's a geographic map and doesn't really emphasize borders, but it emphasizes geography, and there's a reason for this that I'm going to get into. So whenever it comes up, great. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking instead of just waiting for that to come up. I will stay true to my word and keep talking. Bruno's presentation was a perfect segue. So let me get into my bottom line right away. Central Asia is an increasingly important geopolitical theater. And when you put Central Asia together with the South Caucasus, you get what some call core Eurasia and what I like to call the Silk Road region. And sooner or later, when that map comes up, let me see if I can describe it while it comes up. So to my mind, the Silk Road region is that part of the world that looks west past the Caspian, west past Anatolia to the warm seas beyond. It looks north across the Caspian towards the Great Steppe, east to the peaks of the Altai and the arid sands of the Taklamakan, and then south toward the Hindu Kush and the Indus Valley, and then sort of looping around down to the Persian Gulf and back up across the Fertile Crescent and onward to the Black Sea littoral. All right? And I want to argue that not only is this part of the world becoming an increasingly important geopolitical theater, but my argument is that its global importance today is greater than it has been in centuries. So one really good illustration of this is the fact that no other part of the world has more nuclear armed states on its geographic frontiers than the Silk Road region, right? China, India, Pakistan, Russia. But its importance is also much more than that. And this is largely due to the multiplying geopolitical and geoeconomic consequences of three main events that have taken place in the past 3 years in that part of the world. So event number one, the US-led withdrawal from Afghanistan. Event number two, the Azerbaijani victory in the Second Karabakh War. And event number three, the escalation of the conflict over Ukraine due to the launch of what the Kremlin calls a special military operation, and the subsequent choice by the West and some of its allies to impose an increasingly punitive sanctions and export restrictions regime against Russia in response. So we can get into the details later, but my basic point is that the consequence of these three events is the precipitation of a great revival of the importance of the Silk Road region. And I'm writing a book on this, so it's possible that I will go over my time limit. But here's my one sentence summary of the consequences of this trend. Regionally driven economic connectivity is on the way in. Outside power agenda setting is on the way out. And although some outsiders are seeing their relative power decline, while others are seeing an increase, in the aggregate, the power of outside powers is likely to be reduced overall over the course of the next decade or two. So, all told, the balance of power in this part of the world is in the midst of a transformative shift. And it's a balance of power that favors homegrown integration, with both its main architects and core participants belonging to the region itself. And this in turn suggests that the Silk Road region, with Central Asia being an integral part of that it stands a chance of no longer remaining a geography to be won and lost by others, but rather it's on the cusp of becoming a distinct, autonomous, and emancipated subject of international order. Now, this can become clearer through an examination of some of the Silk Road region's emerging set of initiatives and proto-institutions that, when you take them together, may herald the onset of a stable and lasting order in that part of the world. Now, Bruno very helpfully mentioned the Eurasian Economic Union, the CSTO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I want to talk about perhaps the most strategically important one. And the reason that I think it's particularly important is because it only involves countries from the region, right? And it's perfect for the topic, for today's topic, because it involves the 5 countries of Central Asia. And what we've seen is an ongoing text-based process of economic connectivity and regionalization, which began in November 2017 in Samarkand and resulted in the adoption of a formal document of institutionalized cooperation last year. And I'll say something about that in a second. But first, I want to make the following point. The strategic logic informing what is admittedly an embryonic plan now being laid out calls to mind, in my view, older arrangements in other geographies: ASEAN, the Nordic Council, the GCC, and the original European Economic Community. Now, in Central Asia, integration efforts began in the 1990s thanks to Nursultan Nazarbayev's endeavors. He was at the time, the president of Kazakhstan. Now, early outcomes included a whole bunch of interesting things: the establishment of something called the Central Asian Union, later called the Central Asian Economic Community, and then still later the Central Asian Cooperation Organization. And then this was folded into the Eurasian Economic Community that then morphed into the Eurasian Economic Union. Lots of fun stuff there. But basically, the big picture takeaway here is that the rivalry between Nazarbayev and Islam Karimov of Uzbekistan made the full development of that or any institution that had to do with Central Asia basically impossible. And Karimov died in late 2016, and he was succeeded by Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who Bruno mentioned was reelected a couple of weeks ago. And that's when things really got off the ground. And I don't want to go into the detailed explanation right now, but suffice it to say that you have this ongoing text-based process of Central Asian economic connectivity and regionalization. A treaty was signed last year in July, or agreed and then partially signed by some of the leaders. And that's really where we are now. The Central Asian 5 are moving ahead with a formal treaty text of institutionalized cooperation. I think it's called the Treaty on Friendship, Good Neighborliness, and Cooperation for the Development of Central Asia in the 21st Century. It's one of these unfortunately long titles. I can get into the details later, but for reasons of time, let me then make my next point. So I live in Azerbaijan, as does Rodrigo, and I'm convinced that in the time ahead, we can expect Azerbaijan to acknowledge in one way or another the relevance of the strategic logic informing both the spirit and the text of this treaty for the furtherance of its own interests. Now, a first step in this regard may involve the inception of a trilateral meeting format between the leaders of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, whom Bruno identified obviously as being the most serious in Central Asia, and Azerbaijan, right? So Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Now, why these countries? And why am I emphasizing this? Because they're the leaders of this region that goes across the Caspian. And I think the map is still up. And none of these 3 countries are great powers, and none by themselves are dominant, but together they provide equilibrium, regional equilibrium, while setting the tone, pace, and scope of the overall cooperation agenda. So, they're all each middle powers. And I think this is very, very important. Now, the person who coined the term middle power centuries ago was someone named Giovanni Botero in a book that he wrote, incidentally, criticizing Machiavelli's Prince, which, in fact, it doesn't do. Anyway, Botero defined middle powers as states, I'm quoting, that have sufficient force and authority to stand on their own without the need of help from others. Now, in Botero's telling, leaders of middle powers tend to be acutely aware of the dexterity that's required to maintain security and project influence in a more or less prudential manner beyond their immediate borders. And because of that, middle powers usually have the facility to promote trade and connectivity with their neighbors and their neighbors' neighbors. So that's why I think, without question, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan are these kinds of middle powers, or keystone states, which is a concept that was first put forward by a friend of mine, Nicholas Gvozdev, who's a professor of something distinguished at the U.S. Naval War College. And I've written something on this and so on. Now, the way that Gvozdev and I and others see it, keystone states, they're trusted interlocutors, they're reliable intermediaries, and they're critical mediators that can act as buffers between major power centers. So keystone states are the anchors of the Silk Road region. And as we move forward in time, I think it's going to become more and more obvious that although outside actors are going to continue to exert some influence, but developments in this part of the world are going to be less and less likely to keep being decisively driven and much less determined by the oftentimes clashing agendas and preferences and objectives and priorities of the major external powers. My next point, I want to take you back to something, or some of you may remember, Zbigniew Brzezinski came up with this metaphor of the grand chessboard back in 1997. He wrote a book about it, and his whole focus was on this part of the world and how this affects American foreign policy and what America should do and so on. And basically, it was an argument that this part of the world is too important to be left to its core states to build up and manage on their own. He has this sentence, America should be the benign hegemon in Eurasia. Well, without getting into the Brzezinski argument, I think that there's a better metaphor that's applicable to the reality of the contemporary region. And that metaphor is one of a card table. So picture, if you will, in your mind's eye, a room with a card table. And here's what I want you to see. You've got various players staying in their chairs. Some are retaking their seats after a break. Others are coming through the door for the first time. And a few just decided to get up from their chairs, but seem to want to remain in the room. And all the while, the deck is being reshuffled and new cards are about to be dealt. Okay? You've pictured this? This is my mental snapshot of what this part of the world is going to look like very soon. And in some ways, what it already looks like today. Now, an evident conceptual advantage of seeing the Silk Road region as a card table is that there can be more than two players, which is obviously not the case in chess, right? So at a card table, there's plenty of room for more chairs to be added without disrupting the general flow of play. New players can join, old ones can fall by the wayside. Anyone can pretty much cash out at any time. But the game keeps going. And you know, chess doesn't involve hidden information, but at a card table, the ability to bluff effectively is an integral part of the game. And this obviously adds layers of subtlety and complexity that correspond much more closely to the reality of geopolitics. And of course, at a card table, all partnerships and alliances are temporary. Now, in addition, you know, you have disparities in stack sizes amongst the players that are seated around the table. And this, of course, matters. And it changes over time, with real consequences affecting players' subsequent strategies. And starting hands are never even. You know, we all know the expression to play the hand you're dealt, right? So, you know, equality of opportunity, notion of fairness and transparency, all these are not concepts that can be effectively executed by players seated at a card table. So all in all, how things work at the card table is much, much closer to how geopolitics works in practice, particularly in this part of the world. Now, I can spend a lot of time working through this metaphor, getting into the intricacies of various card games, particularly poker and all that. But look, for present purposes, I think what I've said is sufficient, okay? Card table, not chessboard. Now, before moving on, I want to re-emphasize inclusivity. This is the principle that lies at the heart of the card table. It's not just about Moscow and Washington, which is what Brzezinski's outdated, rather imperialistic metaphor of the chessboard is about, right? It's not about just Moscow and Washington. Astana, Tashkent, Baku can take their seats. So can Delhi and Tehran and Ankara and Beijing and Brussels and Berlin, Paris, London, Islamabad, Kabul, and so on. Okay, so the overall point is actually quite simple. If you have what it takes, or if you think you do, you can pull up a chair, take a seat at the card table, and partake in the great game. And if you don't, you can pack it up. You can even walk out of the room. And if your fortunes change and circumstances allow, you can be dealt back in. But regardless of this, the great game goes on. And the key here is connectivity, energy and transport and all that other stuff. And you know what? The Silk Road region in general, and its three keystone states in particular, so Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan, they're effectually indispensable to the fulfillment of the strategic connectivity ambitions of all of the world's major powers. Bruno touched on this a little bit. Now, connectivity in this context has two interdependent aspects. The first is energy, and the second is land-based transportation and manufacturing and service corridors between Europe and Asia, right? So you can call it whatever you want, global gateway, middle corridor, Belt and Road Initiative, all that stuff. And with respect to both of these, to energy and connectivity, these three countries are indispensable to the fulfillment of these Western strategic ambitions, but also the strategic ambitions of China and of Russia and Turkey and so on. And to figure out the main reason for this, all you have to do is look at a map. So you've got the map up there. Because in terms of energy and transport and connectivity and all the rest of it, try as you might, you just can't get around this part of the world. Because to its north is Russia and to its south is Iran. And our Western friends are committed to their sanctions and to their export restriction regimes in both of those places. And this will not change for the foreseeable future. And all of the other major powers have adjusted their thinking about the Silk Road region in general and Central Asia in particular because of all of this. So I think that I have exceeded my time limit. I will end here, and hopefully we can have a good conversation.
Don't worry. Thank you very much. Well, and the same that happened with Bruno. Well, we are opening the map first and the data. And of course, well, we are now in the point of listening to Rodrigo Labartini. In Latin America, well, when you listen to you, both of you, well, we start to find some coincidences, maybe common ground for talking between Mexico, Latin America. Maybe your definition will take us to the regions like Mesoamerica, the Panama Channel, the strategic roads, and so on. But there are other aspects that are important to be mentioned, and Rodrigo will help us with that also from Mexican perspective. He has been living in Azerbaijan for more than 6 years. He is also a member of our task force and member now of the Institute for Development and Diplomacy of IDD of Ada University in Azerbaijan. Rodrigo is serving as a Mexican ambassador, is serving as diplomat in residence at the Institute of Development and Diplomacy and professor in practice in Ada University. He teaches courses on international law topics, including treaty law, human rights, humanitarian law, transnational criminal law, extradition and geopolitics, and energy of Eurasia and the Silk Road region. He has almost 4 decades of experience in international negotiations, bilateral and multilateral issues in the Mexican Foreign Ministry. Prior to being IDD, he served as ambassador of Mexico to Azerbaijan. He has previously been ambassador of Mexico in Nicaragua, deputy legal consultant of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, general director for human rights and democracy. In the same time, secretary and general director of international labor policy in the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare in another moment. During his diplomatic career, he has served as president of the 7th Specialized Conference on Private International Law of the Organization of American States, and of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. He was also responsible for litigating Mexican cases in international forums, including before the Inter-American Commission and Court of Human Rights. Rodrigo, we are here to listen to you.
Thank you very much, Guadalupe, and thank you very much for Comexi for the opportunity to talk right now with you, my friends. And thank you to Bruno and Damian and good old friends I see already here, like Nathan and several other people. Thank you very much again. It's quite an opportunity to talk to you from Blackwood over here. And yes, I've been living here now for almost 80 years, a little more than 80 years. In a very interesting place between Europe and Asia, between Asia and Europe. If you don't mind, even though Bruno and Damian have already shared lots of things, I will share with you, if I'm allowed to. I think I'm allowed. Yes, I can do that. Oh, only a host can share in the meeting. Can somebody give me availability there to share a presentation? Thank you. I call this a bewilderment between Mexico and Central Asia. The two speakers that predecessed me right now, were speaking essentially about a new world. I've always said that in the world there are something like 3 black holes. And I say that with some caution. We always speak about Africa, but when we say Africa, we only think about maybe Egypt, maybe Morocco, maybe South Africa. But you forget that Africa has 54 states. So there's lots of things going there, and nobody really knows about it. Another black hole to start with would be Polynesia. In this area, there are around some 14 states, of which we do not know anything about, like Nauru, Tuvalu, Kiribati, and all merging the same area. But again, it's just a big place of which we do not know anything. And the third black hole is Central Asia. And that is because throughout history, what we did is we always assumed that the area was part of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, Russia and everything. And we forgot that actually there were several constituent republic federations. We forget that when the Soviet Union was created, several countries were invaded and added to the Soviet Union at that time. And so that was beginning to be complicated. And so what I say is that we are in the midst of a bewilderment. We really don't know what Central Asia is. And with that, yes, we know what Mexico is. And now my predecessors have talked about Central Asia. Some people add Afghanistan, some people part of Pakistan, China. It's a whole different area. It's right in the middle. A very important part of what's been said is that these countries are all landlocked. Therefore, they do not have any access to the seas by themselves. They need to go through another country. And in fact, Uzbekistan is a landlocked country, meaning it has to go through 3 countries in order to get to the oceans. Now, one interesting thing about this is that we assume we're on the same world, we are, but we live in 2 very different hemispheres. And I will go about this. We live in bewilderment with each region. One of the greatest challenges is distance on our language, we know about each other, and culture. And I will get back to them in a few minutes. First of all, yes, we have the Pacific. And just to put perspective, but did you know that between Mexico and Beijing, there are 12,400 kilometers? That means some 18 hours on plane, maybe less. Oh, am I sharing? No, that lost. Sorry. There we go. So 12,400 kilometers. And you see the whole world being covered, basically. But if you go to Sydney from Mexico, it's 12,900, almost 13,000 kilometers. And I want you to keep that in mind. Because when we talk about Central Asia, we just think it's on the other part of the world. And it's more than the other part of the world. Imagine the distance, Mexico, Sydney, almost 13,000. But when we go to Mexico, to Central Asia, in particular to Dushanbe, 13,500 kilometers. It is literally on the other side of the world. This is something to keep in mind because we're literally living more or less in the periphery of our own countries, and we're living in theirs at the same time. And this is the first challenge that we need to overcome, the distance. It's an extremely long distance. Traveling from Mexico to Baku, it's a minimum of 18 hours on plane. And with stopovers, you could easily get to 25. One day I've made 52, but you need to move. So distance is one of the first challenges. And these are the numbers precisely. You can see easily that except for Astana, which is only 12,000 kilometers, and that's because in order to travel from Mexico to Astana, you go over the North Pole, the North Pole. But everybody else is basically over 13,000 kilometers. By the way, Baku is only 12,700. Another great challenge, as I was saying, is language. Yes, we speak Spanish. And sometimes we speak English. But what about Kazakh, Uzbek, Tajik, Kyrgyz, or Turkmen? So that presents the first problem for us to deal and understand what was going on. And that is because lingua franca here sometimes is English, but it's also Russian. And that's going to be complicated. So how can we overcome this and to try to find a way out? Another part how to see measure ourselves is GDP. And as you can see, once in the 1990s, when Central Asia countries became independent, that's when we started recording. And this is Mexico's GDP versus their GDP. So you would think that it might not be of interest. Here we have the size of the countries. Kazakhstan is 2.7 square million kilometers, which is more than Mexico, about some 30-40% more. And it is important to keep in mind that this area, just these 5 countries, represent over 4 million square kilometers. That's more than double Mexico. Complicated land, multiple languages, multiple cultures. In terms of population, you might think they might not be of interest, but it's at least in terms of commercial issues, you could find easily a market of 18 million people versus the 128 million people in Mexico. And if you go by GDP of each country, yes, Mexico has in 2023 $1.4 trillion, but they easily reach $500 billion themselves. So it shows there's a market opportunity there. And what I'd say is that once we get to understand the distances and the challenges, we can start figuring ways of how to understand how to deal with each other. So here I start with Mexico's trade with Eurasia. These are Mexican numbers. By the way, that's one issue to deal with. Mexican numbers show how they move around, and particularly, as you can see, the yellow one is Kazakhstan. So throughout the period, essentially after 2004, 2006, it's starting to be a more constant presence of Kazakhstan. Lately, however, it is Uzbekistan. It's Uzbekistan. This one that's given more impetus to it. So it shows one thing, and particularly starting about this year, 2007, something happened between the regions and Mexico. And I would say that that was the year that the Azerbaijan government opened its embassy in Mexico City. And that puts a big issue there, because for the first time, Mexico heard the word Azerbaijan. And when they heard Azerbaijan, they said, Caucasus, Central Asia, what is that? However, it is the first point, sort of the first time that Mexico gets to know what it is. And we're all living in bewilderment. We don't know exactly what they are. We know they're humans, and they speak different languages, they have different cultures, but it's a way to move on. And in the case of Mexico, it opened its first embassy in the region, here in the Caucasus and in Central Asia, the first resident embassy in the year 2015. So you can see those moments. Kazakhstan opened its embassy in 2016, and it means essentially that little by little, after almost a decade, the regions have been learning about themselves. When we start to know that there's another country on the other side, there's another region, And not only that, there's a partner that we can trade with, we can learn. Maybe we cannot speak the same language, porque hablamos español and somebody speaks English. But at the end of the day, if I tell you, hey, how about this? And I say two, I just put the two fingers, then we'll start talking because we'll use hand signals and we'll be able to understand each other by doing that. That is the first part, Caucasus Central Asia. But if we go in this with Central Asia, that's clearly here, how we see the numbers. It's still modest by all means, but at least this region accounts for almost $200 million per year now, which is quite acceptable, I believe. And particularly because both countries, both regions really don't know very much about each other. This brings me to a point that I also said, culture. When we go to these regions, we discover a whole new world, both in customs, dressing, food, even signs. When I go to local Azerbaijanis and I do this sign, or local post-Soviet people in Central Asia, when I do this sign, everybody knows what it means. Does anybody in Mexico know what it means? It means that somebody has had some drink, that he or she is inebriated. There's a story saying that when the Tsar was living, somebody helped him very much. So he said, how can I repay you? And the Tsar said, well, I want to go to a bar and never pay. So apparently he got a tattoo or a mark on his neck indicating the sign of the Tsar. And therefore he would go and say, how do you pay? By doing this. At the same time, if I ask for my friends here that come from Central Asia, when I do this sign, everybody knows what this means in Mexico. It means yes. Or other signs, clearly, this is no in the region. So culture is a way to open up. Another way to open up is also with food. Yes, we Mexicans, we like delectable food. They also like them here. But we find some bridges because at the end of the day, we're still in the same world. In Mexico, we find estragon. When it comes to this country, I find they have tarhun. And surprisingly, they make a lemonade, whereas we mince it and we prepare spice with it. Or when one day I went to the supermarket, to the market, the bazaar, the Yashir Bazaar, and I found parpetiyun. Parpetiyun is nothing else but verdolagas. And guess what? They use it similarly but differently than we do. So culture, distance, and what Damian was saying is also very relevant here in the region. It is, I submit, that is not only just Russia to the north, Iran to the south. When you get to, there's the first choke point here, which is the Caspian Sea. So you either go north, south, or through the middle, through across it. But then once you get here, you find another world, Turkey. You have the Black Sea, again, Russia is north, Turkey to the south, and the sea. So you have to either traverse through it or maybe go to Turkey. And this is the basis for some terminology politically talking, because Azerbaijan, which is located right here, and Turkey are all very close culturally, Turkic states. And this brings to the fore another recent organization that just changed. It was used to be the Turkic Council, and recently changed in 2021 to become the Organization of the Turkish States. So, as Damian says, this is more like a card game at a table, and new players are coming in, new influences are here. Mexico is having a presence, yes, but we're just part of somebody coming to town. Of Latin American countries, only 7 embassies have a presence in Azerbaijan. And I believe, if I recall correctly, only 2 have a presence in Astana, Brazil and Cuba. And I think there's only 1 here in the other part of Central Asia. So I think we're right at the beginning of quite the bewilderment point for us, in the sense that we are discovering each other. We're finding out who we are, how we speak, how we dress, what we do. It is definitely not a black hole anymore, but it is a place to thrive and to find new openings, new opportunities. With that, I'll leave it there, and thank you very much again.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Now we're starting the open conversation process. I may start raising some questions, and after that, Vanessa will help us in doing a little recap on what we've been doing, and we'll raise more questions. One of the issues that I think are strategic are not only the question of the tendencies of development. We've seen how there is a more than 70 years coincidence between the Central Asian countries and also between the Turkey, the Caucasus region in voting in the United Nations. When you analyze the coincidence of voting in the United Nations, we will find that the non-aligned movement, not only the non-aligned movement, but the Central Asian countries usually have the same type of voting in development matters in the United Nations, around water and around other key issues that are important for the world now, biodiversity and others. Another area of coincidence is the nuclear-free zones. Latin America has a nuclear-free zones. There is another nuclear-free zone in Central Asia. Damiano already raised the importance of that issue. However, the center of the United Nations for disarmament is in Nepal. And one has a question when listening to Damian, and why is so far the center? It seems that there is a lot to talk about geostrategic peace and security matters also. Other issues are carpets and bazaars, khanats. Los canatos, we've seen that in a local base, there is a long tradition, very long tradition of community trading and local to local trading in roads that are difficult to travel. Just thinking how the Incas would connect with the Aztecs in Latin America. Long roads. When you see to the Pan American road, you will see that you can see the Silk Road and say, listen, how does this connect when you don't have cars and airplanes? But today, due to the pandemic and the new hubs, international hubs, we find that we can go directly from Mexico to or Argentina or other Panama or whatever country in Latin America through some airlines, through Dubai or through Istanbul, and get shorter. A trip that used to take 40 hours now will take you 20 something because of the stops and so on. But however, it's the meal, and you don't have to go through the United States or through Europe to connect. And this is providing a new situation where we can see how Mexican and Latin American travelers prefer to go for vacation to the Central Asian regions. And we found that you can get chocolate in Uzbekistan and even Latin American restaurants in all of those countries. Mexico is opening a new embassy in Kazakhstan, and well, we're seeing new developments. We see the Pacific Alliance coordinating to have diplomatic presence. We see sports moving. We see Mexican sport people changing nationalities to be in the Olympics and getting medals in the Olympics with Central Asian flags. So what's happening on that matter? Vanessa, let me introduce Vanessa. She is a member of our task force and has been associate consultant of Estrategia Pública Consultores, focused on energy issues. She has 20 years of experience in the public sector. Until 2019, she was sector executive director for the energy and mining, telecommunications, and infrastructure industries at ProMéxico. Prior to that position, she served more than 5 years as advisor for international affairs in the General Directorate of Mexican Petroleum, we call it Pemex, While at Pemex, she represented the company and was part of the negotiation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership TPP, the Mexico-European Union Free Trade Agreement, and USMCA. In addition, she was a representative on the board of directors of the Mexican Associations of Hydrocarbons Companies, and was a liaison between the company and state, international, and independent oil companies, as well as with foreign governments, international agencies, and institutions related to oil and gas. Vanessa also has a vast experience as advisor in the legislative branch. She's worked in the Senate of Mexico as technical secretary of the Commission of North America in the Chamber of Deputies, as advisor on issues of that region in the federal executive. She also has served as advisor to two undersecretaries for North America in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in the Office of the President for Public Policy. Vanessa, help us with your recap and your questions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Guadalupe. I hope I didn't miss anything from Rodrigo's, Bruno, and Damian presentations. They were really great, I think, to show us why it is important to study and to look to Central Asia, especially, I think, Rodrigo, you mentioned something key. For Mexico, it's kind of far. It's something that we don't really think is going to have an impact on us because of the distances that are between the region and Mexico, but there's a lot of impacts, and you already mentioned some, and I will mention some others that I found. But I think I'll start with Bruno explanation. This is a region formed by 5 countries with different developments, but with that are highly dependent in some time from Russia and China, and also key for their natural resources, particularly on the energy markets. And they have a key role, some of them, on natural gas, especially gas sold to China. And that, of course, has an impact in some events that already Damian mentioned that we've seen in the latest years, such as the value chains and how they were affected with COVID, the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, what happened in Azerbaijan, as well as what we're looking on China and China interest in the Silk Road region and its initiative. And of course, what we've seen is that this region has been important for centuries, but now is getting another resurgence of their importance and the key part of the connectivity between the West and the East. And also what we're seeing is a region that is that used to be seen or was in fact highly dependent on Russia. Now the region is emancipating, and we see that in Kazakhstan and the position of the Kazakhstan government with the Russia invasion to Ukraine, and we also see that I'm just looking to my notes, sorry, that as you mentioned, the key is going to be economic and infrastructure construction. The connectivity is also key, and it goes not only related with trade, but also with energy. And in that sense, that's why Mexico should be paying attention to the region, being Mexico's also a country involved in the oil and gas market. I think it's important that we follow what's happening and how China is also interested in getting more gas from the region, in expanding the line D of some of these different natural gas lines that already has with Asia, with Central Asia, despite the fact that Central Asia has been not always getting or having trouble in getting to the commitments that they have with China on natural gas. I think also you mentioned, Guadalupe, some other connections, but I think we also look, and it is related with the recent meeting that happened between the European Union and the CELAC, where the Gateway Initiative of the European Union will be very important in reshaping this relationship between Latin America and Mexico, of course, and the European Union. And we've seen that also in Central Asia, how European Union is trying again to connect with Central Asia and also using the Gateway Initiative to finance some projects in infrastructure that, of course, will be key to this economic connectivity and regionalization that Damien mentioned. And another thing that we can also see is that, which is this war between the U.S. and China, the U.S. is also looking at Central Asia as part of these differences that we've seen, and the fact that both the European Union and the U.S. have seen that both Russia and China are getting into Latin America and into some other regions where they lost their presence and trying to regain that presence again. So we've seen that is happening in Central Asia as well as in Latin America. And I think I leave it there, Guadalupe, and we can go to the questions and answers.
Yes, well, we're asking now to all the who are inside the room, participants, and to raise their hand if you have any question. And let's start with this second round of conversations with this initial interconnected dialogue. Bruno, what would you like to comment?
I paid a lot of attention to Damian's explanation of the current dynamics of the region. And he said that he sees a cooperation between Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan as being non-dominant, non-big countries, but together to have an alliance. Maybe I would like to ask Damian, what would he think if we add Turkey to the group? Because let's not forget that Turkey is the center of gravity of all the countries, including Azerbaijan. And I think to a certain extent, maybe already Turkey is playing this role, but with their own interest. And I clearly see an opportunity for Azerbaijan to be much more active. And I see that there are flights between Baku and the region from Asal. And I think this is a very good start, because let's not forget also that Turkish Airlines goes to each and every country of the region, and that is also giving some leadership in the connectivity. So maybe the question of Damian, how he sees the role of Turkey.
Okay, Damian.
Thanks. Look, I'm going to try to answer this in a couple of ways. Some of you have heard perhaps of this famous phrase that is used both in Turkey and in Azerbaijan to describe the particularly close relationship between the two countries. The phrase is "one nation, two states," and it was reportedly said by Heydar Aliyev, the former president of Azerbaijan, when he spoke in Ankara and addressed the Turkish parliament. It happened soon after an unsuccessful assassination attempt that was reportedly organized by rogue elements of the services of both countries. Why am I giving you all of this background? Because Heydar Aliyev's message that day in the Turkish parliament is not the way that it's usually understood, in the public discourse today. The emphasis was on two states, not one nation. Because it was it was his way of saying, look, we're all brothers and that's great, but I have my house, you have your house, and you should put your intelligence house in order, and I'm going to put my intelligence house in order. But again, the details notwithstanding, the emphasis was really on two states, not one nation. Now, why is this important? Because there is a perception, even in this part of the world, by people who think analytically as opposed to emotionally, that Turkey has a certain degree of ambition that might not necessarily be fully compatible with the way that the other countries see themselves and see their region. Particularly the three that I mentioned, the three Keystone states, and particularly the two from Central Asia, which is what we're talking about today. Certainly Turkey has a place at the card table, if I can keep using my metaphor. But to think of Turkey as an integral part of this region, I understand the arguments in favor of it, but I don't think that it would really be acceptable. Perhaps in the popular imagination in some places, including in Azerbaijan, but certainly not amongst the people who make the decisions in this part of the world. I would be very hesitant to say that would be something that would be embraced with open arms. Certainly the relationship that all of these countries have on a bilateral and to some extent even on a trilateral and whatever other regional Turkic organization of Turkic states, all that business. It's all very good and warm and loving and beautiful and brotherly and all that. And that's not going to change, and that's really sincere. But that's different from saying, let's see if we can actually think of Turkey conceptually, but also in terms of actual public policy. Let's see if we can think of Turkey as being part of our region, whether you call it the Silk Road region, Eurasia, Central Asia, whatever. I don't think that would be something that most of the people that I've talked to would be comfortable with. Look, I'm Serbian, so, take it with a grain of salt, but there's something there's this imperial legacy that the Turks have. And none of the countries that we've been talking about today were in any serious sense part of the Ottoman Empire. And yet, there's a certain perception that maybe, as great as the Turks are and as welcome as their capital is and their support and, the brotherly business and the Turkic and all that it's probably not something that would be willingly embraced. And I think to their great credit, the Turks understand this.
Thank you. Rodrigo?
Thank you. I would only add to what Damian said. I'm fully sure that while Turkey has somewhat of a natural way of coming in because it's Turkic culture, language is very close, even though they're not the same. The presence is becoming something of a change. As you can see, that Turkey wants to have a more presence, and that's why you have the Organization of Turkish States trying to become a little more adept, having more presence. But I fully concur with him in the sense that the Central Asian countries, I don't believe they will want to have that much presence themselves. They have a lot of issues between themselves. I mean, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, they have border issues. Uzbekistan is also involved with them. So in a way, I think they need to first solve part of their issues internally, and also with other looming threats or looming problems coming in, particularly with water, because it's becoming a very vital resource of which almost everybody lacks enough. And that's because due to the incremental population pressure that they're having, Uzbekistan in particular. So it's a new player, I believe, in the region, one that is able to come forward, one that was helped very much with the Second Karabakh War because it assisted very much Azerbaijan. But I think they have to do it with care if they want to do something. Also because the Organization of Turkish States wants to promote trade, but the trade between the states, Central Asian states and Turkey themselves, is not quite that large. Still some ways to work around. So it seems as a good desire, something that has to be taken care of, but something that will not be defining in the future. Mind you, we must also take into account that some countries like Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, they were somewhat able to overcome the oil curse. They had oil and they had no way out. But at least in the case of Azerbaijan developed a three-part system of meetings: Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Turkmenistan, something like that. So it was a change of views, understanding that, hey, this is the place I have to live with, this is the resource I have, so we need to find a way. And it was basically just trying to invest by themselves into their own product. So I think, well, anyway.
I agree with
Damian.
everything Rodrigo says. I just want to add one thing. Aside, so just to stay with the geopolitical arguments, right? If there would be no objection from the countries of the region themselves to somehow bring Turkey in a more intimate and even institutional way, right? Notwithstanding the OTS, which really is not so far at least something that has institutional teeth. I think the pushback from some of the other outside major players would be significant, right? I mean, everybody likes to say the Russians are down, but they're certainly not out in this part of the world. The Chinese would not necessarily be very happy with this. I'm not sure the Americans would. I'm pretty sure the Europeans would not be. So I think all in all, notwithstanding some of the obvious advantages and some of the obvious arguments in favor of this thing, I don't really see this as being something that, that the market can bear, if I can put it this way. But I'll stop now.
Well, still, I would like to open a little bit more the panorama. One of the things that caught my attention was the fastness in the way the integration process is going on now politically, not only economically. Bruno and Damian raised the importance of the economic forums. However, a key change in terms of the international system is the change from being a cultural organization to being an organization of states. And let me say why it is important. For example, in the Latin American Community Organization, CELAC, there is already an agreement to build relations between the Turkish organization, the Turkish States Organization, the Organization of Turkish States. Institutionalization is changing in all the world, especially in the regions. We've seen how after the pandemic, the commerce crisis between China and the United States, the region started to talk again to themselves and trying to rebuild connections and so on. When I was in Baku, one of the speakers, when I asked about Latin America and relations with the Central Asia region and the Caspian region, the answer I got from experts in Azerbaijan, why Latin America always thinks in going through Europe or through Africa, but does not develop a way to relate through the Pacific. We've seen how in the Pacific Alliance, many countries of Central Asia are already observers. On the other hand, one question that I never get an answer to is, okay, goods travel and people through the new infrastructure of what was called the traditional Silk routes. As Franco Pan says, it's not only one route. There are several a network of trade routes. What can come through those? Which goods, which things can come and can connect Latin America and Mexico? And digitality has changed everything, not only tourism, not only airplanes. And now there's a possibility of getting more access culturally through YouTube, through Twitter, to respond for people. The phenomenon is massive. And I would talk about other areas where I think which is important. Why, and maybe Bruno can explain us why the office that is being established, that just been established of the Organization of Turkish States is not in Turkey, but it's in Central Asia. That means some kind of decentralization in one hand. In the other hand, we've seen how DC and the TV series are bringing an image to people that is being closed. So now, independently from government and banks and companies, Latin American audiences are having access to look at the region in a different manner. I would like to comment also, you to comment on that. Vanessa, I don't know if you have another question so that we can do another round. The last round.
Well, not really at this point. No, thanks.
Okay. Bruno,
Listen, I see the point of Damian and Rodrigo with regards the way they see the influence of Turkey in Central Asia. My observation is that Turkey remains a very important point of reference in the region. You said that this Turkish association has its headquarters in Central Asia. I didn't want to put it in my slide next to China and Russia, because the kind of relationship these countries have with Turkey is probably different. My feeling is that China and Russia want to dominate the region, and they have an agenda against each other. They know that Central Asia needs either one or the other, and they need to decide for one of the sides. In the case of Turkey, the relationship has been for years, and I don't think there is such a feeling of intense. Although, of course, in the argument of the Silk Road that Damian raised, the role of Turkey is extremely important. While I'm talking, there was a point that I didn't mention, but since it's probably the last time I'm speaking, I would like to raise. And the war of Russia against Ukraine, as Damian pointed out, has changed the dynamics of Central Asia and has changed the strategic importance that the Europe and the US see in the region. And this has positive and negative effects. I mean, all these countries, they have very high dependence of remittances, I have said, from Russia. Trade is also very important with Russia. And now that many companies in Russia are in the sanctioned list, this trade has been affected. But at the same time, Occidental investors, meaning European, meaning American, and probably Middle East, are seeing now an opportunity to invest in the region, as they are not investing anymore in Russia. So overall, I would say that with this new appetite for the region of investment and trade and economic development, plus the arrival of so many Russians that have left the country because they are against the system in their own country, and here in Tbilisi, the same in Azerbaijan, Armenia, but also all over in Central Asia are coming, and they are coming with money, I think is also laying the ground for a bit more of a different economic development in the region. So I touched on your topic, Guadalupe, but also I wanted to bring the war, Russia-Ukraine, and how it is affecting the region.
thank you for raising that important point, which is also a matter of more conversations. Damian?
Let me just say one thing about the Organization of Turkic States and why I think that's not the answer. I mean, aside from the fact that right now, even there's not that much ambition, but at least not from the non-Turkish Turkic states. There are a couple of things. First of all, Azerbaijan and the Central Asian members of the OTS take the concept of sovereignty and territorial integrity particularly seriously. Turkey's push to bring in sort of a hybrid membership status, the what's called in some circles the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, this self-proclaimed entity,
yes.
Except for Turkey. This was not particularly well received, notwithstanding the fact that, for the sake of brotherly relations, a compromise was made. Point number one. Point number two, if I'm Iran, I would love to see the OTS become an important regional institution because it guarantees that my influence in Tajikistan will skyrocket. Not sure that that's good for regional stability, regional security, and so on. So I think that there are other mechanisms to do something similar that need to be more inclusive and more focused on the region itself and led by the region, of the region, for the region, by the region, to bring up Lincoln. I think that this is a much more it's something that the actual actors in the region, in the core region, would feel more comfortable with. It doesn't mean that there isn't a place for the OTS or for Turkey. Of course there is, but not as the flagship institution.
Okay, well, that's the same that they say about CELAC, but it's still working. Usually international organizations don't disappear; they function better or not, right? Okay, now that's important because we are in Latin America. We like to analyze region integration and institutions, and taking advantage that you're there. This is very helpful for us to understand precisely those kind of things. Rodrigo, tell us what would you like to comment on what we've been talking?
I gladly do so, but I see two persons are raising their hands. I don't know, because we want the politics participants. So maybe we can give an opportunity, but not sure, I'll go.
Okay, Alejandro Castillo, and then Vanessa after. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Alejandro Castillo. I'm from Monterrey, Mexico. I am the CEO of the Casmal Group, which is an international logistics company. And also I'm a professor of international relations and international business at the University of Monterrey. I was part of the Caspian Basin Studies last year at ADH University in Baku. So I am very happy to see Damian again. And I want to ask and comment that you were talking about these regions, this importance of this region. And I would like to add that, of course, we should consider not only the Central Asia region, but also add the South Caucasus. And I will agree with Bruno with that we can take also Turkey, but also Georgia, because this integration of not only geopolitically, but this integration in connectivity is very important, no? And this connection from China to Europe, you can call it the Middle Corridor or whatever you want to, but as Guadalupe mentioned, there should be some international cooperation between regions. And that's a point that I would like to ask you, Damian, and Ambassador Lombardini, how can Latin America, but how can Mexicans or Mexico or Mexican companies could take advantage of this interesting moment that we are facing, not only in Latin America, but also in this region, Central Asia and Caucasus, in terms of international cooperation, but also in terms of how can we take part of these big projects that are developing right now in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the question of Vanessa, and then we go in reverse to do our final comments. Vanessa?
Thanks, Guadalupe. In fact, it's more a comment than a question, just to follow up on Bruno's point that I think is key related with Russia invasion to Ukraine and how it has an impact and how it is also helping to bring Central Asia to this strategic position that we see today, particularly with the European Union and the fact that the European Union has this policy of the Green Deal and is looking to de-risk or divest the way they get oil and gas. And if we see, even though the production of oil and gas in Central Asia is not going to solve all problems of the European Union, because it's not as big as to do so, it will of course help. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And we've seen already that with support from the European Development Bank, with some initiatives such as the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation, and how the European Union will also help to develop infrastructure to keep this idea of the connectivity that Damian mentioned, how connectivity could become key, and how the European Union, in looking for this divestment of or looking to put all its resources in just one country, will help to develop infrastructure in Central Asia.
Thank you, Vanessa. Rodrigo?
Thank you very much. On the point, I still say that Turkey has presence, but I don't think it is a deciding factor. It will be the local countries that have to organize themselves and see how they manage. Yes, the Russian-Ukraine issue has changed issues, has changed views, and we see it right here in the Caucasus after the second cut-off of war, definitely, yes. But there's a lot more things that need to go in here. And one thing that we learned when we live here is that this is a very geopolitical area. In the sense, when one country says something or puts out a press release, it's because it's responding to something that happened in another country. So you get, the good thing about those press releases, if you miss the original one, you go and see and you find it. So they're actually talking to each other all the time. Let me put it one simple way. When the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railroad was inaugurated at the end of October 31st, if I'm not mistaken, 2017, just 11 days later, Russia and Kazakhstan came out with, hey, we have a new railroad. They're going to build it, yes. But it's just one act responding to the other one. Everybody's paying attention to everybody. And to the comment by Alejandra, I would just say, the way I think to come into the country is you need to take into account two things. Yes, distance is a problem, that's complicated, but also the size of the economies, of the real economy, la economía real, is not really that much. So they tend to buy a lot of products because they don't have self-sufficiency. So that opens a lot of great avenues, precisely for Mexican exporters particularly. And that way, that's the way it has grown from Mexico's presence here in Azerbaijan. It actually went from $2.3 million per year during 20 years until last year that it reached $62 million. So it's a growth of 35 times in the span of just 5 years. So it shows the dynamics, but that's another issue. In any case, I sent you a chat just in case you may need to have this information, but I think that's good. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Damian. Final comment.
Yeah, first, let me just say something that, with all seriousness, what Ambassador Labardini did not mention is that he is largely responsible for that astronomical growth in the bilateral trade. And that's, but that's really important to mention because literally the best person on earth to be able to answer that question in great detail is Rodrigo. I would like to give a big picture answer, and that is, and this in a way has a lot to do with, Alejandro, what you're doing. I mean, with your, the fact that you own a logistics company, right? Connectivity here is the key, right? Energy and transport and all that business, right? I made this argument and I'm happy to defend it forever. The Azerbaijan in particular, but Kazakhstan also and Uzbekistan are indispensable to the fulfillment of the strategic connectivity ambitions of all the world's major powers. So if I were Mexico, I'd be looking at figuring out how to make investments in or how to find financial interest in all of this connectivity that's increasing dramatically as a result of the fact that the northern corridor is closed and the southern corridor will never open. I think that's really, really important. That might be a way to bridge the distance. There's this really interesting piece of fact, and I'll end there. One of the largest air cargo transportation companies in the world is an Azerbaijani one. It's called Silkway Airlines. They have regularly scheduled flights more than, I think it's 2 or 3 times a week to Chicago and New York and so on. Now that's 1% of total transportation, right? Most of it is done by sea, by maritime routes, and then a little bit by land. But that 1% is highly profitable. It's a lot of just-in-time stuff. It's a lot of high-value stuff, sensitive stuff. So there are all sorts of things in that context, really, that I think particularly Mexican companies can do. And yes, the distance is a problem, but again, Rodrigo found a way to overcome distance. So it's perfectly possible to do, but those are the growth industries. That's where all of the geopolitical and all of the geoeconomic focus is going to be. Connectivity.
Thank you, Damian. Bruno?
Apologies. Guadalupe, I think I made my comments. Thank you.
Okay, well, I want to mention you all, and we're inviting everybody to look at what we are doing in Mexico now. For the first time, we are opening new courses in universities. So far, we have in the past, only 1 or 2 universities that had a focus on Central Asia, the Mediterranean, the Caucasus, but now this is opening. And thanks to the linkage between Mexican experts and geopolitical experts, global experts, and regional experts, and the work of universities like ADA or other universities in the Central Asian countries. I think that's a very important thing. On the other hand, I want to raise an area that we have not present today, which is the science and arts communities. Maybe the ones that have traveled and know more are the architects and artists and the books and the libraries experts. And that then the channel, the canal, the knowledge channel is something that doesn't need trains or cars today. We can download books, and we're seeing how books on Central Asia are having more demand in Latin America and the Caribbean. But Rodrigo raised an important question. We need material in Spanish. If we don't have the materials in Spanish, the barrier will not be crossed like it is being crossed in YouTube and in the Netflix and other areas where for the first time we're looking contemporary Central Asia. Our unit is trying to open the debate and linkage and build new networks of knowledge. I happen to not present it myself. I'm the coordinator of the Knowledge Network on Regional, Global, and Regional Affairs of COMEXI, and I coordinate precisely this great group of people, of experts that is open to dialogue and comments and hearing to connect with the region. Thank you very much. We invite you to look at the record of this regional conversation through the Knowledge Network and the website of COMEXI and the different digital networks where COMEXI places content. And I want to thank especially the team of COMEXI, the team of the General Directorate and Joint General Director of COMEXI, who accompanied us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the participations. It was really enlightening for me that actually I'm not an expert on Azerbaijan, and I'm really glad to hear and see through Zoom all friends like Rodrigo. So big hug to you up to there, and thank you to all the participants.